So I am joined today by Catherine. Catherine Toms, welcome.
Thank you so much, Emma. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Lovely to see you, as always. Had a slightly unusual path into marketing. Tell me about that. Take me back.
Actually, I suppose it's like lots of people's careers these days, isn't it? A few different chapters. So I actually always loved marketing and did my degree at uni in media and communications, back where that was considered to be something that was like a little bit unusual. And then when I came out of uni back in the late 90s, was desperately applying to get into marketing roles, and they were very, very scarce on the ground. I actually found myself working in recruitment. So I joined Hayes and started out my career there, but very, very luckily managed to work under a really good boss and get into a really interesting division back in the early 2000s. So this was the time where everything was changing with that industry. So back in the day, it was like, put your ad in the local paper, stand by the fax machine and
Yeah.
CV or resume, queue up at the post office to put stuff in the post. And all of a sudden, back in the early 2000s, digital turned up. The World Wide Web was becoming part of people's lives. We had LinkedIn emerging on the scene like 2002. We had job boards. And I was lucky enough to move into the digital division, which was all about helping Hayes as a business, helping the recruiters, and helping our clients adapt to this whole new digital world and digital ways of doing things. So it was a really, really exciting time. But obviously, there was also quite a lot of fear. People were worried about bias. Was that going to change recruitment strategy? People were worried about privacy and how do we protect people's data? People were worried about, that wasn't going to be a fair process. So it's really interesting that that was something that I was seeing back in my career 20 years ago. And it's almost, word for word replicating what we're seeing now. So moved into digital, and that's where I've stayed for the last 20 years. So working in digital marketing and working with businesses through understanding, what's the latest thing that they should be paying attention to, whether that was that shift from traditional media into online into, okay, mobile first, search,
Mhm.
social, navigating all of those waves of change and doing it in the right strategic way that you understand how that's impacting not just the technology, but how you think and how you work and how you approach your job. So very, very exciting career. So moved from Hayes into a digital agency, and then in 2015 moved back here to Australia and launched my own business with my husband, where we work in digital education and consultancy work now.
Very exciting. So this is your 10-year business anniversary, it must be.
Sure is,
How
absolutely. 10-year
exciting.
anniversary in Australia and 10-year business anniversary.
Congratulations. Very exciting. Um, it's so interesting, isn't it, when you reflect back? Because as you say, like at the time, the questions that were being asked about digital, it's almost the exact same replica. And I think how easily we forget that we've actually all been through this before and we actually know how to navigate change. But at the time, as you say, it can feel a bit scary and people can be a bit fearful of the new thing kind of coming around the corner. I definitely want to get into talking about AI more specifically, because that's the that's the big change that everyone's kind of grappling with at the moment. But I guess more broadly, for you, as you sort of look back on your career and your, I guess, kind of acceptance of change, willingness of change, being excited by change, what do you put that down to, do you think?
I think working in an industry like marketing, I mean, all industries have been affected by technology and change, but particularly in marketing, where you're so led by human behavior and what's happening in people's lives, you've got to be adaptable. You've got to kind of think of different ways of doing things, new ways of doing things, new ways of connecting with people. So yeah, that constant curiosity is obviously a really important trait in any roles these days, but not being fearful of change either, being able to embrace it and sort of see where the opportunities are and see what's new in how you can reach customers or get out to customers, or what different technology or different channels are emerging. It's just a career choice where I think you need to show that constant adaptability. And as much as anything, it's having the mindset that change is just probably the only constant, and it's not something to be afraid of. That doesn't mean that we throw out the good stuff that's working. A lot of the main premises of how you do good marketing, and you understand your customers and psychology and positioning and pricing and all of those elements have never changed in the whole time I've been in the career. But being able to bring the new stuff in as well and keep on top of new ways of doing things and exciting ways of doing things is an extremely important trait in anyone that, is in that kind of career.
Mm. How do you sort of see the wood for the trees sometimes? Because I think obviously when it's something big like AI now, it's kind of everywhere and everyone's talking about it. But there is a point in time where that hasn't happened yet, that it's very new, that it is the kind of the edgy, different, do we go in that direction? Potentially could be a fad. There've been many of them over the years. How do you ascertain in the very early days if it is just going to be a fad or whether this actually is the next big thing, do you think?
Absolutely. Let me answer it a couple of ways. I'm going to give you like the theoretical kind of, fancy answer, and then what we actually do on a sort of day-to-day basis when we're deciding in our own businesses or deciding with marketing teams that we're working with, whether you follow something. So there's something called the Gartner hype cycle. Sounds very fancy, but Gartner come out all the time and they track technology and they track what's changing, and pretty much every technology follows the same wave. Okay, so things emerge and there's new innovations. So lots of the new innovation that we're talking about at the moment, whether that's AI capabilities, machine learning, agents, so the latest thing that everybody's getting all excited about, they pop onto the scene and there's a lot of excitement about them. They're like innovative, they're the shiny new thing, as you said about. Then what happens is people start to adopt it. And then naturally what then happens is it falls in often to what's called the trough of disillusionment, because we get a bit ahead of ourselves. We have massive expectations of AI at the moment. We go on there, we expect it to be this superhuman that's just going to understand us overnight, and we stick in one prompt, and if we don't get the perfect response back, we're like, oh God, that didn't work. That was a dreadful idea. It's terrible. I knew it was a waste of time. This AI thing's not all it's cracked up to be. And that's kind of what happens at the moment. Is a lot of AI, we're in what I would call a bit of a trough of disillusionment, where we're excited and we want to jump on board, but we haven't quite figured out the right use cases, the right places to do it, how it's going to add the most value. And that's where we're at now. And then that's when we start to see mainstream adoption happening, is when people have sussed it out and actually you can see real use cases working. So how we adapt that is we've got something called a wave, where it's like, okay, so watch is the most important thing. So keep yourself educated, follow good people on LinkedIn, read the latest, credible sources. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just pick one or two newsletters that you stay across and you keep up to date with. So you're always watching what's happening in the industry, watching where kind of like early adopters are doing things, but let them make the first path to failure or success, but start seeing what's working. Then in terms of action, you've got to educate yourself. You've got to kind of see, well, is that, how do I learn more about it? How do I get my head around it? How's it impacting me? Then V is verify, because verify is, okay, well, is that actually something that's going to work in my job? Is that actually something that's going to make a difference on what I do day to day, so that you can then evaluate how you use it moving forward. And we kind of go through a bit of almost like a quadrant of weighing these things up. So if you're watching it and you're seeing, massive adoption, then that's something, yes, I need to take action. I need to work out how I'm going to put this into my strategy or put it into my day-to-day. I then verify, did it work? And then I evaluate if I want to move forward. But having a bit of a structured way of thinking about these things, so both watching big picture, this Gartner wave, it always happens, and then having a small way of weighing up, well, what does that actually mean to me? And is that something I need to worry about? Is that impacting my job, my industry? helps you kind of don't get overwhelmed with, oh gosh, what DeepSeek doing? It's like, it doesn't affect most of us on a day-to-day basis. Let all the big noise happen and just focus on what you're doing.
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? Like not getting sucked into some of that stuff that feels like, maybe feels like, oh, everyone else is doing it, I should be doing it, but the perception might not be the reality there.
Yeah.
I would imagine one of the other challenges as well, and I guess for marketers more broadly, but specifically with stuff like this, is if other people in the business or the senior leaders in the business are coming to marketing saying, oh, what are we doing about this? Are we working with AI? And kind of putting a bit of pressure on marketing to kind of have all the answers when they can't really have all the answers yet because they're not really there yet. But again, how do you think, what's the best way forward there for people when they've got those questions coming at them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Emma, and we see it all the time. I think what we're seeing at the moment is a bit of an expectation gap, where you're right, things become very exciting at a boardroom level, and words start getting thrown around, and everybody's reading reports that say, oh gosh, AI is going to transform this industry, and we're going to make $1 gazillion by 2026 if we start doing all these things differently. And those expectations then come down from the top in terms of, oh, well, where are we finding productivity gains, or how are we changing the way we work, or why can't we spend less money with our agency, or why can't we bring all this in-house? But you've got to then start with two things. Number one, from a top down, if you don't have a strategy or a vision or a roadmap on how you're going to do that, and actually how those changes are going to align with your company goals or what you're trying to achieve, that's a huge ask. It's like, well, where are we going to use these particular tools or technologies to add value? And then from the bottom up, if you're not training people, and this is our biggest issue at the moment, is we've got an enormous skill gap where we're just expecting that everybody can just jump on overnight and not learn tools. It's as much as anything about the people looking at, well, what do I do on a day-to-day basis? Where would it make sense for me to use more tools or AI to get better productivity gains? If you're not upskilling people both with the technical skills of knowing, well, what's available and how do I use it and how do I get the most out of it, but also then the people and the thinking skills to go, well, where would this make most sense to my job? You've got a bit of a big missing link in the middle, where big ideas of, yeah, we could save all this money, or what are we doing? But then you haven't trained people at the bottom up to look for the real opportunities and find the people that are on the ground doing the job day to day. So yeah, that would be my pushback. It would be like, well, what's our roadmap? What are we trying to achieve here? Where do we see the biggest value? And then also, how are we upskilling and preparing our teams to make sure that they're primed to make the most of it?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's that phrase that keeps getting thrown around you're not going to lose your job to AI, but you might lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI. And I guess that is that gap. If people aren't being upskilled,
Yeah.
and they're feeling perhaps a little bit of that stress and pressure of, oh, I'm not sure I'm across this. That's that gap, isn't it? In the middle of people thinking, oh, that's me. I'm not across it. I don't really know how it's going to fit into my day to day. I imagine that's a lot of the driver with what your business is focusing on at the moment, in terms of trying to help people bridge that gap and kind of help them to upskill in a practical, kind of more day-to-day approach. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So since being back in Australia, I've been focused on marketing training and upskilling. And that has been across, marketing teams looking to drive growth over the last 10 years. So that is, how do we tap into all the stuff in our toolbox of data, technology, and then increasingly the last couple of years, everybody's question has been, well, how do we get on board with AI, and what should we be doing, and how should we be using it most effectively? And that's exactly the questions that we go in and talk to businesses about. And it's thinking about, well, what access to the tools have you got? What skills have you got in your team? What would you be able to achieve better if you were using AI more effectively. And of course, step one where most of us have been focused over the last year or two is, well, how can that make you more productive? But where it gets really interesting is actually how can it help us perform better at our jobs, and how can it help us take away a lot of those tasks that we don't love doing, so that we can be more strategic or more creative, and we can connect better with our customers, and we can actually do more of the things we love every day. But yeah, 100%, it's how do we embrace it in the right way. But the way that we think about AI is very much, it's baked into everything else you do. It's not some bolted on thing that you just stick on top. It's like, well, no, you look at your day-to-day marketing processes. What are we doing? Where can it add the most value? You look at where, as I say, where you can save time, where you can do things more effectively. It's not looking at AI as some abstract tool or thing outside of it. It's how do you weave that into the ways that you're already working to be able to do it a little bit better.
It's interesting, isn't it? And just as you were saying that, I was thinking that even just kind of existing software that even I use in my very small capacity, now there's AI features kind of built into that. And I think certainly I probably am guilty of in terms of the language I use, that AI is kind of out there somewhere. But it's not. It's in my phone. It's in my TV. It's in all my software. Like, I'm already using it.
Well, that's it. And that's what's really interesting, isn't it? Because again, I think, obviously I come at it very much from that marketing lens and marketing headset, but the more AI becomes normal for all of us on a day-to-day basis, the way I see AI is exactly as you've just said. It's like, years ago, we were not intrinsically linked with our mobile phones. Whereas now everything we do all day, every day, from jumping in the car to where am I going to get my best coffee, to using my maps, to sticking my Spotify on, a lot of stuff we do day in, day out, our mobile phone has become an intrinsic part of it. We don't even think about it. We just turn to it and use it. And I think that's where AI will be in the future. At the moment, it feels awkward. And as you say, like this thing that we go and find, or this thing that we go and look for and bring into our days. Whereas you're right, most of the tools and systems that we're using, even just last week, if anybody's on Google, they will have seen the Gemini assistants just suddenly woven its way into all of your Google products. All of your marketing technologies already got AI optimization into it, which is just getting more and more and more every single day. So it's just going to become woven into what we do. But your skill at the moment is starting to just be aware of it, think about how it can enhance what you do. It's not here to replace what you do by any stretch. Those human skills of creativity, problem solving, critical thinking are more important than ever. But I totally agree with you that I think moving forward, at some point we won't even notice AI. It's just there, and we tap in and out of it, and we use it, every single day in lots of tasks we do. But we won't even notice it because it's just a natural part of what we're doing.
I was just thinking, and I think you and I are of a similar vintage, shall we say, that we're of the generation that can very much remember the before and the after. Even then, when you were just talking about your phone, like I remember getting the first iPhone when I would have been, I don't know, it was probably about 26, 27. So, very much.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Had one of those, had the Matrix like slide down phone. I thought I was so cool. Anyway, but we do very much still remember before and after. We remember cassettes and CDs, and when the iPod came out, and the amount of kind of change that we have witnessed already, and I'm sure we'll continue to witness, versus generations where they've just been born into it. It's kind of always been there. Do you see that difference when you're training and working with teams? Do you see a bit of a generational difference in how people feel about it, approach it, interact with it?
It's a really interesting question, in that I think you're right. I think people of our vintage, as we put it, we've seen so much change. So we're very good at adapting and going, oh yeah, this is the next evolution, as you say, from sitting in our bedrooms and recording on our tapes to where we are now. we've embraced an awful lot of change in our careers and seen a lot of change and seen it improve a lot of things. If I, rewind back and the amount of time that we used to take on very manual admin-based tasks and things we didn't love doing, that we've been able to replace and do better. So I certainly think there's an enormous willingness and openness to kind of jump on board and embrace new technologies and new ways of doing things. I don't think there's anybody that's resistant to it as such, but it is interesting. If I want to get my phone fixed and I've got a problem with my app, I pass it to my daughters, because you're right, that brain has just been wired to innately do things, fix things, think things in a certain way. It's not even a consideration.
No, it's just there. Yeah.
Almost the worry that we see is businesses where they are resistant to AI. There's a couple of things that are showing up there. So we've got a lot of organizations that we work with where the policy is just currently still no AI. There's worries about security, there's worries about particular industries, regulatory factors. And the concern there is twofold. One is staff retention, because either people are then going to say, well, hang on, I'm going to get left behind if I stay in this industry or this company or this team. I'm not getting the opportunities, and my skills are really quickly going to start lagging behind because I'm not using this on a day-to-day basis. I'm not even being encouraged to learn it. I'm actively being blocked. So there's that worry. And then on the second side is, it's a little bit like telling somebody today, no, you can't use your mobile phone. No, you can't go on Google. I'm sorry, Emma, but they're going to do it anyway. And that's what we're also seeing. We came out in the LinkedIn Microsoft work survey last year about what percentage, massive percentage of people are BYOing their own AI to work. So you might have it blocked on your work laptop. You might not be able to access anything by your work VPN, but people are still then going to upload stuff on the side and use their mobile phone. And that actually leaves businesses at a greater risk. So one of the big I've seen for, bit of a 2025, perhaps it'll be a trend, perhaps it'll be something that we see, is almost this like AI amnesty at work, where businesses are going to have to get a little bit more open and say to people, what tools are you using? What do you need? So that they can put some guardrails around it. But that's probably the biggest difference, I would say, is maybe more acceptance in slightly more mature people in the organization, and maybe a little bit more happy to toe the line and patiently wait for the business to adopt it. We're not going to see that with some of the more up and coming people in their career. They're going to exit or just do it themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like your phrase there, BYO. BYO technology, BYO AI. But yeah, I think you can see how that happens. Even just, I can't remember what I was reading the other day, but something, people asking fairly business specific and quite complex questions within ChatGTP. And then you're like, well, ChatGTP now has all of that information, some of it that might be quite sensitive and might actually be proprietary, but without thinking and, with no ill intent, someone's just plugged it in there to ask a question. Those are some of those broader overarching questions that need to be solved.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we actively encourage businesses to, again, going back to the upskilling and transparency and having conversations. If your team know, well, this is where the company sits with AI and this is why, and we're having very open and transparent conversations about it, you can actively encourage people to safely experiment within guardrails. If you don't give people anything, then they're going to do whatever they do. You can always switch off training data so that you're telling the system, don't remember this, I don't want you to remember this conversation, I don't want you to learn from this data. So there's security settings that you can put around things. But yeah, companies need to be clear with employees what they can and can't use it for, so that they know, well, okay, well, don't do this. And we have a phrase, very Australian, but swimming between the flags and staying safe and doing the safe things and not getting out of your depth with AI is a really important skill. But if people don't have any flags, they don't know where to swim between. So that's really actively working with a lot of teams on just putting some do's and don'ts around there so that people are clear on what the use cases they are allowed to and where to make sure they don't get into hot water or inadvertently leak company secrets.
Yeah. Where have you seen so far I guess, success stories? Like, what have you seen companies doing really well at this kind of early stage that you would say, oh, that's a great example that other people might want to consider?
Yeah, so we're just starting to see kind of, real use cases coming down the line. I think that 2024 was, for a lot of businesses, opening up their eyes, starting to experiment, starting to find pilots, starting to find use cases. And predominantly those initially have been around productivity gains that they've been able to get in the teams. So we've seen teams being able to do stuff faster because they've got a replicable process, or they're using an AI tool to help shortcut specific things in their day-to-day workflow and streamline things. So we've certainly seen a lot of success cases around productivity. And then the next stage that we're now starting to see businesses get to is being able to see, as we said, those, like more performance, more creative ways of doing things, better ways of weaving AI into their day-to-day. So that's kind of, the 2025 goal. The biggest success we have seen is where companies are quite clear. As we said, they've got a roadmap. They are clear on where they can see AI playing and bringing some value. So the specific use cases that we saw within marketing last year, obviously a lot of companies started with content creation. It's great at content creating. It's probably the worst ghostwriter or copywriter you'll ever find, though. That's not one of the great use cases. It's getting a lot better. Systems like Jasper and Writer are getting a lot better at emulating your style and sounding more human. But there's still been massive efficiency gains from drafting stuff, editing stuff, creating stuff, and likewise on the imagery side as well. But where it's getting more interesting is where businesses are now starting to weave it and look cross functions and cross teams and say, okay, well, where are we all experiencing some bottlenecks or some friction points, and how do we plug it in? And having a bit of a plan and not trying to do everything overnight. That's the big thing, because there's the technology, but the biggest success comes if you can get your people on board as well. It's a change management piece, isn't it? And it's getting people to rethink the way that they do their jobs day to day and go, well, actually, I can do this bit easier and faster with AI, so that frees me up as a human to do more of this stuff. And having that kind of more strategic view of how people are working and what that means for their day-to-day is where we're going to see that the really greatest uplift. So in summary, the companies that we're seeing doing it really well are training. They're having a bit of a transparent conversation and plan. They're bringing people on board and hearing where it's adding the most value. And then they've just got this, don't try and do it all now. Step by step by step, what does the next 6 months, 12 months look like? And then just keep evolving and growing from there.
Yeah. And in your experience of the businesses that you're working with, is that often being driven by marketing, or is it coming out of technology or another part of the business? Like, how integral are you finding marketers to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, marketing has been one of the probably early adopters within the organization, because it's been a place where actually we've had AI for quite a while. We've been using automation, we've been using, bid optimization, we've been, trying to tackle the personalization challenge for the last God knows how many years. So it was already embedded into quite a lot of the stuff that we were doing. And obviously it had a lot of natural affinity with the productivity and the gains that AI brings. So certainly marketing has been one of the areas where I would say that there's been a lot of early adoption, a lot of testing use cases, but it goes way broader than that. And almost, as I say, if you go back full circle on my career, that adoption all started out within HR and learning and development, and how can we do things better there with regards to our internal workforce? So they're certainly across it. Finance, there's an awful lot going on, and absolutely it ties in then with technology and legal, because legal, you've got all of, well, how does this impact our policies or regulatory, and are we doing the right thing? So where we're seeing the greatest success, again, I would say it's businesses where absolutely marketing are given a degree of safe freedom to test and experiment and see where things are really working, but without posing any risk to the organization. But then marketing are working collaboratively with sales, finance, IT, legal, to look at it on a more broad basis, because that's where it gets really exciting. Is it can touch every part of the organization and really help the way that different teams work better together cross-functionally, but also gain greater gains for the organization as a whole. But it's spot and then not getting siloed.
Yeah. For someone that's listening to this and perhaps their organisation isn't providing training or isn't kind of, leaning in, what are the sources of information that you would particularly recommend? Like, what can they do to sort of start to upskill themselves, essentially?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. And I think, again, a really, really good point, because depending on where you are, that pace of adoption will be quite different. You need to still take it upon yourself, though, to educate yourself and learn. It's not a time to put your head under the duvet and go, well, my employer's not worried about it, so I'm not going to worry about it. So I suppose it's finding, there's a couple of things there, in terms of using it yourself. There's a million things you can go and play. You can set yourself up a free ChatGPT account, or jump onto Gemini and what they're up to, or go and have a look around on Perplexity or Claude. You can set up a free account in a matter of minutes, and just trying to experiment and see what the capabilities are. So I did a holiday planner on ChatGPT the other day. I got it to put me together a whole itinerary. I've done weekly meal planners. So you can find individual use cases. So start thinking about, well, what could I test it out with? And that will get you practicing things like, oh, how do I prompt it? How do I get the best results? What can it give me back? What's it good at? So a little bit like, as we said, those very early days, and we all wandered onto Google and had to learn how to search the internet. Don't not do it just because your employer isn't making it part of your job. Society is changing around you, your job is changing around you. So upskill yourself anyway by using it, learn by doing. And then secondly, then find some trusted, sources of learning. And, as we said, there's a lot of information out there. For marketers, what we have set up and established ourselves is we're now doing free weekly training. So 30 minutes that you can come along, learn some skills. We are doing it because we believe in, AI education for everybody. And we want to make sure there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. Going to YouTube, you might have to wade through 27 hours of videos to actually get something that hang on, that's useful, I can trust that. So we're trying to break through some of that overwhelm ourselves. And we're certainly not alone. There's lots of other content out there from credible people as well that you can go and learn from. And then for marketers in particular, one podcast I listen to every week is the AI Marketing Institute. Paul Rautzer and Mike Kaput are very, very generous with their information. So there's some great people out there where you can just go and start listening and learning. So summarize, do it yourself, find some good reputable training that you can come along to and just get hands-on and learn some practical skills. And then find some, leaders in your organization on LinkedIn or podcasts and places where you can go and just have a listen in and hear what's happening. So don't let your skills stand still or feel hold back. Just get on and do it yourself, and you can use it in your day-to-day life if you can't use it in your work.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, and something I talk about a lot more broadly is that idea of taking ownership of it for yourself and not waiting to say, oh, well, my company's not doing it, or, I haven't had any training on this. You actually need to advocate for yourself, take ownership of it. And as you said, there are so many sources of information now, and that podcast sounds super interesting. And as you said, there'll be so much on YouTube, and maybe you need to sort through a little bit to get something that kind of is relevant to you and marketing specifically.
Yeah,
But
that's
you've found that, like, there's so much information that's available out there for free. And I think, you've really got to kind of take ownership of that yourself.
Definitely. And that's where I love that you layered onto that. Yeah, find industry experts in your area talking about it, because if you go broadly and just start trying to learn AI, you'll blow your head off.
Yeah.
You just blow And it's a lot of stuff you don't need to worry about. So within AI, you've probably got, I'd say there's 3 levels of information out there. You've got some people that are sharing some really good base, get you started skills. And to be fair, that's kind of what, where Steve and I are starting at the moment, is with the foundational stuff. We're like, look, we can't assume that everybody's living and breathing this stuff every day. Where do you get started? How do you learn how to use some of the tools safely? Then that industry specialist knowledge. So find people, that are talking about a specific vertical. So everything we talk about is specific to marketers, content creators, digital people. And then finally, yeah, absolutely. There's people talking about very big, broad AI topics that, these are all the people that have come in and had a big opinion about DeepSeek this week. And it's like, you probably don't need to worry about that. I'm following all those people because I need to know how that's coming down the line into marketing and what that means. But you don't need to blow your head off following, the big technology announcements. It's just finding people that speak your language and go, oh yeah, I can actually see how I can apply that back in a day-to-day context and actually make sense of it and use it. So finding the right people to follow and that speak to you is super important.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I can't help but kind of, think about what the future is going to be like. And I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like how, how life is going to be and what it's going to look like. And it's very interesting.
I know you've got to get your crystal ball out a little bit. And it is a time of huge change. But I think, again, if we rewind 20 years, we all thought the internet was going to change everything. So, World Wide Web came out, particularly working with retailers at the time, everyone was terrified. God, we're never going to go to the shops anymore. We just buy everything online. Shops are going to be dead. It will all be online shopping. We'll do everything by e-commerce. Drones will drop our groceries off at our front door. And then what actually happened was the massive dot-com bubble burst, didn't it? Because people's behaviors didn't change at that pace. And that's what we've got to remember, is we are human. And we may have technological capabilities, but we're then working out, well, how does that fit and how does that impact our career? And, obviously you've got bigger conversations happening when they're looking at the overall workforce and the economy and how do we, show up on what we spend our days doing. We're not all going to find ourselves out of a job and replaced by an AI agent in the next couple of years, but it is changing the way that we work. So back to that lovely quote that you used earlier around, AI is not going to change your job, but it is, not going to take your job, but it is changing it. So in order to embrace the best bits of that and keep yourself ahead is about making sure that you keep across what that means for you and ways of working. But it also means that human skills become even more important than ever. So in order to work effectively with AI, you have to have a deep understanding of your industry. You cannot go on and get it to do things if you don't know your starting point. So you've got to be a true industry expert. You have to apply a stack load of critical thinking. A lot of what AI is going to give you back is not that great. You've got to be able to filter through and say, yeah, that's a good answer. That's not a good answer. Creativity, empathy, all of those skills, curiosity, all of those skills become even more important when we can pass off a lot of the more automated, repetitive stuff. So, I think it's changing things. But if you're a deep industry expert and you bring a lot of human skills and you can work out how to bring AI and, do your job easier, better, that's kind of where I see it in, it's not going to replace those jobs, but you want to embrace the future to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point there on kind of soft skills. And I think leadership more broadly becomes even more, already is extremely important, but becomes even more important. And the other thing you mentioned earlier, which I think kind of just sort of weaves into that, is that the principles of marketing aren't changing. Like they are still the principles of marketing. It's, customer behavior, all of that stuff. It's about how you weave AI into that, not kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, absolutely. And that's what we've always seen, in 20 years, I'd say, of working with marketing teams. It's being able to embrace the good bits of it that enable you to get out to market faster, more effectively, but with the right messaging. So yeah, using our technology to understand our customers better. It's like we were initially with personalization. I remember even going back 7 or 8 years ago, everyone was like, oh, that's creepy. No one's going to want that. But we also don't want to go back to the days where we all got spammed with Viagra ads. It's like, what are we choosing here? So yeah, you're absolutely right. The fundamentals of marketing, understanding your customer, creative thinking, biopsychology, empathy, and these are all the things that AI lacks. So if you imagine today, we're working on AI, imagine something like COVID dropped in again tomorrow and the whole world goes into global pandemic. AI doesn't have a contextual point for that to understand, well, how might that impact how our customers are thinking and feeling, what's going on in their lives, what's happening. It just doesn't have that contextual understanding. It's got a knowledge base and it can go and search a knowledge base and it can return back a likely probable answer to you. But all those nuances around understanding our customers, what's happening, what's real time, what's topical, what's going on, how are people thinking and feeling, that's where, bringing those two sides together and being able to use your technology and your data and all of those great things to help enhance our creativity and how we connect with customers. That's where, like the magic happens, but it's very much the human element on top of the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to the 10-year anniversary of your business, how do you find working for yourself and having your own business, having come from, Hays, huge global corporate? How do you find now working for yourself?
I think that's probably, without doubt, one of the biggest shifts I had to make in my whole career, of that, that structure, but also having all of that around you, all of that, somebody to go to if the computer stops working, and a huge team of people to lean on and brainstorm off, and that kind of working together, shifting to work for yourself is a huge adaptation. And what's quite funny, actually, just a little bit of the history of how it happened. So Steve and I were both on our corporate career ladders back in London. It's 2014 and we decide that we want to move back to Australia. He's Australian, so we decide we're going to relocate back to Australia. And, we'd come from these careers where we'd both, worked in a very different place, doing very different things. I was very much digital strategy and marketing. Steve was education. And we actually decided to take some time out on our trip moving back down under and emigrating back here permanently. And that was where the idea of, bringing our two businesses together happened, where we were like, well, hang on, you've got the education skills, I've got the digital marketing skills. How about if we did something for ourselves? Brilliant idea. We moved back to Australia and we start our business. And by start our business, I mean, right, we've built a website, we've got a brand, we've done some problem research, we understand the market. We're like, yep, we've got something to offer here. Neither of us had ever worked in Australia. So the network was slightly thin on the ground. So, those early days were, God, it was hard work, Emma. It was really tough going. It wasn't like we'd just been in had a whole network of people that we'd worked with for 20 years and then just decided to do our own thing. We literally started from scratch. So had to build up all our connections, had to work really, really hard in kind of getting a reputation in the market, finding credible businesses to collaborate with. And we're so grateful, for the early days of some really great cheerleaders and people that trusted us and jumped on board and supported us, which has enabled us to then grow and, continue to work and support businesses over the last 10 years with their training. But yeah, those early days were definitely a little bit of a nail-biting, hair-raising ride for sure.
Yeah.
It's a big change.
Yeah. And I do think it's one of the things I think that does come across quite strongly on LinkedIn that I'm a little bit critical of. There does seem to be a kind of a, entrepreneurship or working for yourself is the ultimate goal and it's only a positive thing. And I don't think that's true. Like anything, there are positives and there are negatives. It will be good for some people. It will not work so well for others. And it's one thing, I don't love. There does seem to be a little bit of that kind of culture on LinkedIn that, that's the thing that everyone should be aiming for, which I don't agree with. And also I think you don't see so much of the, you hear a lot of people talking about how great it is, and absolutely there are many, many positives to it. There are also many, many downsides to it, and as I said, it's not going to suit everybody. So it's nice to hear someone give a very honest answer to that question and actually say, do you know what, it was really bloody hard.
Yeah,
Still
it's
is.
not. Absolutely. And it's not for the faint-hearted to walk away from, that job security and that monthly paycheck, to trusting the process that, no, we've got something we believe in here, and we genuinely believe that, business will be generated and business will come in. But again, that comes back to the fundamentals of good marketing. You've got to understand, well, yeah, I've actually got a knowledge or a skill set or a product that people would want. And then you've got to be very confident in kind of putting yourself out there and building your business and marketing yourself and growing and, having a reputable, credible product that people then want to keep coming back to and recommending others to. But no, there's certainly been plenty of huffing and puffing days back in the early days where Steve and I were like, oh, should one of us just go and get a job? Those early days, they do say that setting up your own business, it's a little bit like having a child. Those first early days, it's like having a baby. You've got to kind of like throw everything into it and it's all consuming. And then the first few years, it's like a toddler. It will be great for a while and then it kind of falls over. And I do feel like, we're very lucky now that 10 years in, we've got much more consistency. We've got a really well-established network. We've got some great people that advocate for us and support us and give us opportunities like this to come and talk on their podcasts. And, it's great, but there's no such thing as you say, these overnight success stories that come out and reckon you can get a 6-figure salary if you just follow a 6-week program. It's like, really?
But that's normally the caveat, isn't it? You can do this too. Just give me $500 to learn my easy three-step process.
My blueprint to business success.
Exactly.
In 2 weeks. It's like, no, it's down to bloody hard work and just consistency and showing up and having a good product and being trusted. All those good things that you imagine. But hard work.
Yeah. How do you find working with your husband?
I know. I think the number one thing that most people say when they meet us, whether it's professionally or personally, is like, "Ooh, I couldn't do that."
It's brave. Right.
It's always quite interesting. I would say what's brilliant about it, you've got someone that absolutely understands you inside out, has totally got your back. Knows what you're good at, knows where you struggle. So you've got the ultimate business partner. We get to spend loads of time together. We have been so lucky that we've been flown around the world for speaking engagements and training engagements. We've been to New York and Singapore and India. And, that is a massive positive. Who gets to go and do, shiny business trips with their partner. So there's loads of like really, really positives. I guess the negative or where it gets challenging is you can be very critical of each other. There's no filter like there is with colleagues. Sometimes you can be quite hard on each other. And also just learning boundaries. So I think back in the early days, one of us would pop up while the other one's like making sandwiches or about to jump in the shower and go, I've had a really good idea. And putting boundaries around when we're in work mode and talking about work versus, no, this is family time, this is, date night, whatever you want to call it. It's really important to be on the same page and have the same values around that. But I love it. I can't imagine any other way. But yes, it does get a very polarizing reaction from people when we say what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And the proof is in the pudding. 10 years, 10 years later, that it's working well. So good for you.
It was a journey. It was definitely a journey. I would say in the early days, we overlapped a lot because we didn't necessarily know where each other's skill set sat. So sometimes I'd be doing stuff that probably now I wouldn't touch and vice versa. So I think that was one of the really big things that we worked with a business coach on a few years ago, was actually defining our roles and responsibilities and you're good at this, you're good at this, because obviously that's a much more productive and efficient way to work. But, having kind of formalized roles and responsibilities has really, really helped us not trip over each other, but also enabled us to grow as well.
Final question, Catherine, always the last question on the pod. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Accepting that you will never know everything and not being afraid that that makes you an imposter. In that, particularly in the world that we're in at the moment, everything is moving so quickly with AI, with technology, with how that's impacting skill sets down the line. I think it's to try and put yourself out there and say, oh, I'm an expert, is actually, questionable, because we're all learning together. We're all learning from each other. It's evolving, it's changing. So I think removing that pressure to feel like, gosh, I've got to know everything, just being curious and being open and being adaptable is super important, and realizing that, that doesn't lead to any questions of your credibility. It's actually way more powerful in a room to stop and say, gosh, that's a really interesting question. I've not been asked that before. Let me think about it, or let me research that and come back to you, than trying to feel like you've got to know the latest, because so much new stuff is emerging every single day. And honestly, we are still working out how it's impacting skills, what jobs it's going to change, what's going to happen, how do we use it the right way. The tool capability and also what we're able to do with it is evolving so quickly. I think if you remove the pressure of going, gosh, I've got to be an expert and I've got to know everything, is the most valuable lesson that anybody could take away at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. I will also, in the show notes, link to Catherine's LinkedIn and website. So if people are interested in the weekly webinar that you mentioned, they'll be able to find their way to that. But thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me, and such an interesting topic. I feel like it's one you could talk about for days, but
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for having me, Emma. I always love your questions. They always prod me to think a little bit harder and a little bit deeper. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Really enjoyed chatting this morning.